Thanks for tuning in to The Juggle is Real. I'm Andriana, and I'm so excited to share this conversation. It has been so impactful and probably one of the most important chats I've had so far this year. On the podcast today, we are talking about nurturing your relationship while raising a family. And for this talk, Dr. Mary Marano is here, and I'm so excited to share this with you. Dr. Mary Marano is a transformational force in the field of relationships and mental well-being, with over 30 years of experience helping individuals, couples, and families restore connection and trust. She is known as the do or die relationship doctor, and she has guided hundreds from despair to hope, equipping them with the tools to build lasting, meaningful relationships. Dr. Mary holds a Master of Science in Psychology. She's a specialist in mental health and has a doctorate in counseling and psychotherapy. She's the owner of Life and Family Counseling Services and the CEO of Changed by Mary Coaching. And yet her greatest accomplishment is being the mother of over 80 children, embodying her deep commitment to care, growth, and transformation in every aspect of life. Today, we are going to be talking about parenting, which is such a beautiful but demanding journey that can strain our relationships because between work responsibilities and just that daily chaos of raising a family, couples often struggle to stay connected. And I know this is something that I am often struggling with as well. So in this episode, Dr. Mary Marano is sharing her expert insights on how couples can nurture their relationships even during the busiest seasons. And we are going to explore those small, intentional ways to keep love strong, navigate challenges as a team, and prioritize connection as a couple, even when time is scarce. If that sounds good to you, let's dive right in.
Hey, I'm Andriana Gonco, and this is the Juggle is Real podcast. As I share my ongoing journey from experiencing burnout to leading a more mindful and intentional life with better balance, I hope you feel seen, that you realize your worth, lighten your load, and prioritize your own needs. As we hear from leading experts and well-known faces in the wellness, entrepreneurship, education, and motherhood space, I hope you gain insights, proven practices, and learn actionable tools to help you enjoy the juggle of work, family, and everything in between with a little less stress and a lot more ease, joy, and fun. Most of all, I hope you find what you need to simplify, streamline, and supercharge your own journey of better balance and self-love. Are you with me? Let's get started.
This episode of The Juggle is Real is supported by Dove. Now, winter is in full force, and if you're anything like me, your skin is feeling extra dry and your energy might be too. But what if I told you that your morning shower could be more than just a routine? It could be a reset. Between juggling work, kids, and life, I don't always have time for elaborate self-care rituals, but I do have time for a shower, which is why I am all about making the most out of those little moments. Now, Dove's brown sugar and coconut body butter scrub and restoring coconut and cocoa butters body wash turn my everyday shower into a mini spa moment. No extra time needed. The body scrub is a 2-in-1 that both moisturizes and gently exfoliates, leaving skin soft and radiant, while the body wash locks in moisture with 24-hour renewing micro moisture. And the scent is so good. Think vanilla, brown sugar, and coconut puree. It's basically self-care in a bottle. So if your winter routine could use a little reset, start in the shower. You can find Dove's body scrub and body wash at Walmart and Shoppers Drug Mart because small tweaks can make a big difference. Now let's get back to the episode. Dr. Mary Marano, welcome to The Juggle is Real. I'm so thrilled that you could find some time in your schedule to sit down with me and have this conversation.
Thank you for having me. This is wonderful. I love the name of the podcast, and it really is a description, I think, of what a lot of people and families go through because the juggle is real.
The juggle is real. And I know that you understand it very well from your own personal experiences, but professionally, You see people who are going through these very busy seasons of their lives and are maybe having some challenges and struggles, and you're supporting them in so many ways. And so today I'm very much looking forward to it because I feel very often, and I've said this before, sometimes my husband and I, it feels like we are two ships passing in the night, and one going to this arena and the other's going to that arena. And then we're all over the place. And I do find that while, I love my husband so much and we have, great times together with our family, it is the one-on-one relationship that I think is taking a back burner right now in our lives. And so as parents, we are, we're in this very demanding chapter. And that's why I think it's so great. We're going to talk about how we can still, stay connected, nurture our relationship as a couple while also being parents. But before we get into all of those beautiful topics, I would love to know a little bit more about you and your background and what inspired you to focus on couples and family counseling.
Oh gosh. Well, I've been married myself for 30 years. I've also been and still am the mother of over 80 children through fostering.
You heard
So
that right. Yes, 80.
80. So three of my own biological children, and the other through fostering teenage adolescent girls. So, we have a lot of experience. And what I say all the time to, couples when they come in, sometimes I'm the, end of the line, do or die relationship therapist for people. So they've come to see many therapists before, and I'm sort of, if you can't help us, then we're not going to make it. We're going to get a divorce. And so when we sort of sit down and we create a little bit of safety in that, couples start to find that they have a perfectly good relationship. However, they forgot to nurture the couple as well as being parents. They forgot that they were, people before they had children, or they were sexual beings before they had their children. So in my community, I'm also known as their local friendapist. So I've created an environment in, the clinic where people come in, and it's in the name, life and family counseling. So they become part of our family. And we have long-standing lifetime relationships where they feel safe enough that they start to refer their family and friends, and they also, bring in their children or whatever life transitions they end up going through. And in my work, I have a very small window of time to create that safety for people to restore hope, right? We go from despair to hope. So when a couple sits down and hears that they have a perfectly good relationship that just needs some tweaking, it almost takes some of that pressure off for them to start to look through that relationship through a different lens.
I think that's so great. And I think, you have so much to draw from, and seeing how you're so connected with creating a family for the people that you're supporting and nurturing. I think that's just so wonderful. What would you say if you had to pinpoint it? I know you're saying this is sort of like their last step before they think that things are ending, but what would you say are those main common relationship struggles that you see among parents? Or, when it comes to we just need a little bit of tweaking, like what would you say what are those struggles that you're often seeing again and again?
The first thing I would say to everybody, that love only takes us so far, and the rest is work,
Mm.
right? The effort that we put behind our relationships is critical, not just for the couple, but also for children. People always get their, the hair on the back of their neck stand up when I say this, that the couple is actually more important than the children.
Ah, okay.
Yes, because children learn everything they need to know about life, love, relationship through the hub of that couple. Like, you're their world. So if that couple is connected or disconnected, right? Think of families, they're systems, but they're also emotional systems. So if we're disconnected, if we're not talking, if there's distance between us, the children will feel that. So they're not going to feel it in the same way that adults feel it. but they will internalize that, and they'll start to say like, something's not right here. And they don't say, oh, mom and dad are having stuff going on, but what they actually start to do is act out. And you start to see that in their behaviors.
So
And one of the
interesting.
things that, yeah, and the common things, are the hustle and bustle of diving into our children's lives. And we have to be careful because children can also be a surface issue that gets us caught up in not addressing things that are actually happening in the relationship between that couple,
Okay, you're
right?
blowing
And
my
that could
mind.
be
Yeah.
that could be intimacy issues. We haven't had sex for a really long time, or I miss my partner, or, I'm feeling really distant from you. And intimacy is tricky because sometimes we don't have the language around that because nobody really teaches us those skills, how to be relational. I don't know about you, but, when I first got together with my husband, nobody sat me down and definitely did not sit him down to teach us how to be married people. Right. So we sort of like just, kind of with a wing and a prayer, figured it out. Right. And these aren't skills that we teach, children, and we should be.
This is really good. I mean, I think we just go about it and assume, much like parenting, that once we are part of a couple or a unit, or once we become parents, we'll just know what to do instinctively. And to what you're saying, and to your point, I mean, it's definitely work, and it's something that you have to continually, you know, you have to put effort in and energy into. And that's why I think it's so important what you're saying. Now, with parenting, with work and actual careers and vocations, and life in general, it is pulling us in multiple directions. But what you're saying is the connections that we nurture are what really is keeping us grounded as parents, as couples. That is what's most important. And I love the analogy that you use with the connection thread. Especially when we are in very busy seasons of life, especially when there's a lot on our plate. So the thread, and I would love for you to explain this further, but what you're saying is the thread represents the love and connection despite the distance or the busyness. Even when stretched, it helps keep you tethered to your partner and keep you tethered to what matters. So, can you explain this a little bit more? How does this concept of the connection thread apply to modern relationships and family life?
I think in two ways. I'm sure you've heard that expression, hanging on by a thread,
Yeah,
right? Because
yes.
things can get really busy, and sometimes, that's really the only thing that's, connecting us to the other person. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of John Gottman. He is a renowned psychotherapist that wrote The Seven Principles of Making Marriage Work. And there's a small, excerpt in there called the 5 magic hours. And he outlines, in such a really simple way how couples can stay connected in their day-to-day activities. And there really are some simple things that we can do to keep that connection. How we leave each other in the morning, how we part, right? It literally takes 2 minutes to say goodbye to your partner, and then, ask them one thing that they're doing in their day. Like, if they have a doctor's appointment, or if they've got to do some kind of drop off, or they're going on the class trip. So when you come back home and you reunite, you have like an opportunity to have a 20-minute conversation with your partner. So you can keep that connection and have some dialogue that's stress-free, not like the hockey, the dance, the pick up the groceries, who's doing tomorrow morning, that sort of thing. You have a stress-free conversation, and you make a point of doing that at the end of the night, and then we have things like, making sure you compliment your partner, show that like appreciation and affection. Thank you. I love you. I haven't seen you, but you look really great in those jeans. Whatever that little bit of, we call that sort of reactive intimacy, right? And then we have things like affection, which is, kind of self-explanatory, like that, kiss goodbye or holding some hands or just like a touch, like as you're, kind of brushing past each other. So you're not just ships in the night, but you
Hmm.
might just like, touch them to make sure like I'm still here, right? Like that's the thread that we're talking about. And then making a point of having a 2 hour date every week.
Okay, I'm
That,
definitely not doing that. Definitely not happening
yeah,
over here. Okay, continue, please.
yeah. So keep in mind, like something like this is like 5 hours in your week that if you really think about it, you could probably manage some of these things. That date night doesn't have to be anything extravagant either, date
Hmm.
on a dime. Remember, we had a very young family, and I would be working late at night because I had my home office, and then he would put kids to bed. And when I would come upstairs, he'd have two Tim Hortons coffees
Hmm.
waiting. And so that was our date. They had gone to bed, and and sometimes those dates were really silent. Like we had the coffees, but we didn't really even talk that much because, you're spent at the end of the day, but you've kept that connection and it's very intentional,
I think
right?
that's
And
really important, the intention behind it, right?
yeah. And we don't have to do things, like I said, that are extravagant or like, Instagram worthy, that we
Hmm.
think we have to, post this big thing and, we kind of get caught up with what other people are doing. And we have to remember that those are, just snapshots of, and they may not even be real life experiences.
Absolutely. 100%. Now, you mentioned something called date night on a dime. I think it's worth mentioning because, like, when you first said a 2 hour date per week, my mind just automatically went to, okay, and who's going to babysit and, where are we going to go? And then, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to get dressed and wash my hair and all these things, right? That's immediately what came to mind. And then
Yeah.
very quickly, you supported that with it can be as simple as, just having some time together once your children are asleep or, being creative with it. So, for the listener who might be like me thinking it has to be extravagant or social media worthy, what are some, small, meaningful ways that we can maintain the connection, budget friendly ways, or ways that might not, you know, increase the capacity that we might not have or put extra things on our plate that we don't feel we have the capacity for at this time. What's this date night on a dime?
Yeah, so things like feeding the kids a little bit earlier, right? Getting them all ready, sending them off to bed at whatever time they go to bed, and cook your dinner or have that meal prepared so you can have dinner for two and you can sort of set the stage. Because there's some people that don't have, a babysitter or family members that can support, looking after the children. So it's really up to them to sort of, take on all those responsibilities without any shared help. So that's a great way to, jumpstart that intimacy or being able to not have to spend a lot of money, but just have dinner later where it's just the two of you. It's a great way. That's where, like, I'm not opposed to putting on a movie for the children, right? Well,
Mm-hmm.
you can have dinner over here and, you can get a little bit of takeout, whatever, in terms of um, your financial situation or, whatever, sort of your needs are in terms of childcare, that might be a great way to do that. The coffee at night, like you don't even have to buy Tim Hortons coffee. You can make, uh, 2 cups of coffee in the Keurig or, boil some water for some tea and, hold that connection. You can go out on your back deck and have a makeout session. The power of kissing or things like 6-second hugs. I'll give you two examples. So the kissing, 20 seconds, like imagine putting two chairs, it's freezing outside. Maybe you have like a barbecue or a little outdoor fireplace. You can set up two chairs. You don't have to stay out there for 6 hours, but you can set the stage for, something fun. You can roast a couple of marshmallows. You can even do that with the kids, and then the kids can go inside and mom and dad can stay out there for a little bit longer. So when I'm saying like some stolen moments, that might be what some of those things look like. If you're having a 20-second make out session, this is reactive intimacy, right? It actually starts to release oxytocin in the brain. And that's our bonding, hormone or chemical that gets released and makes us feel really connected. So there's the physiological threads that we're talking about and the actual physical threads of making sure that, we're doing all of those, physical touch or, we're staying connected in other ways. But that happens in our brain. Same thing with those 6-second hugs. And this is some homework that I give couples when they come in. 6-second hugs, 6 times a day, and holding it for 6 seconds. And I'm going to challenge you to do this because it's really hard to fit in 6 hugs a day for 6 seconds and do that consistently. The moment you start to hold each other for 6 seconds, and if you have children, this is amazing because what happens is kids want to get in there when they see mom and dad hugging each other. But what you're going to do is you're going to actually say to them, hang on a second. This one's for mom and dad, and then we'll do a family one. And for two reasons. Number one, that's your thread, right? You're staying connected. It's releasing oxytocin. It's regulating your breathing, right? And it reduces your stress response, number one. Now, when kids see parents doing that, they want to get in there, and you say, hang on a second, this one's for mom and dad. It now role models for them affection between a couple. It role models for them that the couple is important and it needs to be nurtured, that it's showing them how to be a relational person, how to have fun in the relationship. And they're going
Very
to eat
good.
it all up. They're going to love it.
This is good. And can you go over this again? The stress response, the nervous system regulation, the breathing regulation. I mean, you have that with your spouse. So the challenge is 6 hugs a day, each hug being a minimum of 6 seconds, and also a 20-second kiss with your partner. I think it's doable. I mean, it's definitely not something that I am currently doing, but I think even the busiest of people, I mean, you've got 6 seconds, my friend. I mean, 6 seconds is completely doable. And to do that a few times a day, I think that's great. Now, one other thing before we move on, I want to just touch upon, you have mentioned it, but what we call maybe love in the trenches, as you've discussed before, and intimacy when you really are exhausted, when you have a lot on the go, and when you think you possibly have no energy for anything else in your life. What advice do you have for couples who are in a very busy time to encourage them within their relationship to make time for intimacy?
So there are two parts to intimacy, the physical part of intimacy and the emotional part in how we share with each other. And so she's called the sex doctor, and she talks about reactive intimacy and spontaneous intimacy. And in order for spontaneous intimacy to happen, so that's the physical part of our relationship, there has to be a little bit of a build up to get there, right? So that would be, kind of some of the little connection pieces, those threads that we talked about earlier, right? Because if we don't have those things, right, then it creates distance between us. And then we sort of forget that part about we were a couple first. Right. We also have to be careful that, if one of the partners, I feel like I'm taking care of them like one of the children, right, then that partner becomes less attractive to us. right? And so then we start to lose that connection of intimacy. And in our busy lives, right, you have to schedule intimacy. So if you think it's just going to happen organically by the end of the night when you have a young family, no. And I want you to get creative. Remember, we were parents of over 80 children. So we had to get creative when it came to that, time of spending our own quality time together. And, if you're working professionals, don't wait till nighttime, have a conversation with each other and schedule the morning off while your kids are at school, right? So find ways to have those moments and keep those threads. It doesn't have to necessarily be traditional that, when the lights go off, the kids go to bed, and here we are. Because, how many times have parents fallen asleep in their kids' bed?
The time. Absolutely. Absolutely. This is hilarious and also very true. Yeah, yeah.
That person's not coming back. So if now the next morning, if you know that we've scheduled the morning off, right? We have the luxury of having adult children that love to spend time with us. And we are still doing the same things about getting creative in our intimate life together. And so we have to change it up, right? Because, they're around a lot and they're up a lot later than we are. So it's really, again, using that, the best medicine that we have is talking, right? How we communicate those things and actually plan for that, and there, I mean, we could talk about just that in itself for hours and hours. But those might be some, ways to jumpstart it. And then we have those beautiful languages of love. When we think of languages of love, physical touch, words of affirmation, spending quality time, gifts, and acts of service. So there's a great quiz that, Gary Chapman wrote, and couples can go on his website, and it takes literally seconds just to fill out, the quiz to find out what your language of love is. And the idea is to swap those languages of love, your top two. And that's another great way to jumpstart that reactive intimacy because it's actually something that happens in our brain. So imagine all day exchanging those, love languages, right? So if yours was acts of service, and, that's my top language of love. So when Jim is washing dishes, and he's at the sink, I say, wow, man, that's the sexiest thing I've ever seen is, you washing those dishes. And when he does acts of service for me, it frees my time up and his is physical touch. So then there's more chances to have physical intimacy because I don't have to now spend my time cleaning up the kitchen at 10 o'clock at night when I've done, the rest of my day.
It's
Make
interesting
sense?
that you say that because when my husband and I moved in together, my mom actually gave me the book, The Five Love Languages by Gary Chapman. And I will say it's been sitting in a drawer. And so perhaps it's good to pull that out and revisit those love languages. But like to your point, we can definitely put that link in the notes for this podcast episode if the listener wants to explore and do that quiz, because I think it's so important to understand what you value and what is supportive for you is likely not the same for your spouse, but it's good to know what those things are so that you can, in those very small and simple ways, provide them with those languages of love that are best suited for them. Um, any other things that you want to touch on when we're talking about intimacy and in relationships, or any stories? Of course, not mentioning any names or any examples that you can provide that might help the listener and relate it back to their life.
Yeah. So one of the traps that people fall into, so if we sort of used languages of love as an example, right? We usually give our partners the one we're good at.
Oh.
So if I'm good at service, But the other person doesn't care about acts of service because theirs is, words of affirmation. So here I am, and I'm giving this person all these acts of services, and I think I'm doing a good thing. But now all of a sudden, I don't feel recognized or appreciated. They may not feel recognized or appreciated because I'm giving them a language of love that they don't care about. So they're not going to reciprocate. And then I'm here saying, look at all these things I'm doing for you. And over time, getting angry and resentful at this person because they don't care. And that's not the case. Right. And so it's funny, I have this wonderful client that I was, working with, and she was complaining about her spouse, and she's like, I can't believe it, I do all these things, I tell him he's good looking, and I do all these acts of service, and like around the house, and make sure all of his needs are taken care of. And and he I think Walmart had like undershirts on sale, and because he's so busy with work, he could never get to, buy his these favorite undershirts. So she had been at Walmart, and she goes to pick up these undershirts because they were on sale. And when he got home, he was over the moon and couldn't, thank her enough about, these undershirts. And she's like, they're undershirts. And because he just didn't have the time to go and do that. So she's like, I do all these other things. I get no recognition. He never says thank you, but I go and get these undershirts. So she captured the language of love for him, right? Like she thought about him. It was an act of
Mhm.
service. It's also a gift. Right. And so she finally caught on that if I give him the one that he wants from me, I'm going to have better results. Right. It's like Jim doing those dishes at the counter, and giving him, that those words of affirmation. Hey, you look really good by that, sink over there. And he'll do more of those things because now the response is it frees me up, and I'm likely going to give him his language of love. Right. And the other thing is, when I said love only takes you so far and the rest is work, it doesn't matter what area of our life we're talking about, it requires effort
Mhm.
and consistency. Imagine if you just decided, I don't want to be a parent today. How is that going to work out for you?
It's
Right?
really not. Yeah, it's really not.
Absolutely. You can't just say, I don't want to put effort behind my marriage today or my relationship or any of your relationships. If it was a friendship, the same thing. You wouldn't have that friendship for long, right? Because slowly over time, right? You've got a love tank. I've got a love tank. And in order for relationships to continue to thrive, I'm going to deposit things in your tank with the hope that you're going to now be reciprocal and deposit things in my love tank. And now we both feel warm inside because we've had this exchange. Now, if I keep putting things in your tank and I keep putting things in your tank and I'm getting nothing in return, what happens over time? So think of relationships. When we stop doing that with the other person, our tank is empty, and you can't move that car with an empty gas tank, right? So that's where we start to have caregiver fatigue, or relationship fatigue.
Makes so much sense. And it's interesting because we're often speaking about our own selves, and you can't pour from an empty cup, and we have to care for ourselves in ways to ensure that we're nurturing our own needs, especially as parents. And I've spoken to some incredible parenting experts who speak to filling your children's buckets, and so you have to make sure that you're providing them with the attention and the love and the care that they need to fill their own buckets so that they can feel empowered and confident and loved. And to that point with your partner to be able to fill their bucket so that they're feeling loved, and you can keep that connection going, and that reciprocal process in that you're both pouring into one another in these ways. So I guess very important to have that conversation about what is, important, or what is feels supportive for your partner, or even easier, go do that quiz to find out what that might be if it's not something that you can easily just speak to. I think sometimes we might think certain things, but even off the top of my head, when you list the five love languages, like they all kind of sound good. I mean, I'll take what I can get, but there are ones that speak to me more than others, right? So, being very clear and having that conversation, I think, is just such an important step in the right direction. Anything else that you'd care to speak to on that topic before we move on?
Yeah, just that what you said about filling our children's buckets, right? How can you fill your children's buckets if your bucket and your partner's bucket, is half full? So remember how, if parents aren't emotionally regulated, if they're not managing their stress, that spills over onto the children. Right? You have to remember that, children are just little versions of who we are. And that expression, the apples don't fall far from the tree. So if our children are acting out, if, you're finding them to be more anxious, or some of their behaviors are regressing in some kind of way, take a pause and say, okay, what does their environment look like? So if I'm having problems in my relationship, or the partnership has had some conflict, or we're having trouble in our connection, those children are feeling that, right? And so you're going to see their responses to, family life, or, at school, right? There's going to be this rippling effect of the consequence when we're not nurturing those parts of our relationship.
Such a good point. Absolutely. So, on that note, then, when we're looking at our relationship and staying connected as parents, earlier you said that the most important part of the family dynamic is the partnership and is the relationship, and then the parenting and the children come second to that. Can we speak to this a little bit more, and really viewing your relationship as the foundation of your family and the importance of that? Because I'd really like to talk about parenting as a team, but can you speak to us more about how we can maybe shift our mindset, to look at and start with, mom and dad as a couple and that relationship first before looking at the family's overall well-being?
Yeah, I just want to preface that I'm not saying children are not important, or,
Of
you
course,
know,
of course.
don't, don't send any hate this way. However, when it comes to the partnership, right? I'm gonna, do a quick lesson on responsibility to and responsibility for.
Mhm.
Parents are always responsible to and for their children. I'm a huge advocate for children, especially when we're doing couple work, because they don't have a voice in the relationship. And so sometimes we can sort of be blinded by, the negative lens we might be looking, through. So children, get impacted by that. So it's always me sort of cleaning off that lens so we can understand the impact that marriage will have on the children. And so when you're responsible to and for your children, you're responsible for all of their needs until they're at an age of maturity where they can take on those things by themselves. Usually that starts after, 18, right? When they're supposedly adults. But now today, 26 is the new 18. So that's a whole other, conversation. Now, responsibility for, right? Now think of the marriage or their partnership. Responsibility to inform. We are responsible not for the other person. We are responsible for ourselves, how we think, how we feel, how we behave. You are half of that partnership, but you're 100% responsible for how you're showing up in it.
Mhm.
And when we talk about responsibility too, you're responsible to show up in your relationships in general as a healthy, safe, functional adult.
Mhm.
And so you can't control the other person. You're not responsible for the other person's feelings or their interpretation of things, but you are, required to do that because you are responsible to and for your children,
Such an important
right?
distinction.
So
Yes.
absolutely, right? So that's why you and your partner are the hub of family life. And so when there is stress in that, relationship, that relationship can't hold all the tension. So where is that tension going to spill over? It's going to spill over onto the children. And that's where we have to be really mindful, because one of the number one adverse childhood experience is separation and divorce. And I always say that, divorce is the gift that keeps on giving to children, because they will forever have to adjust to their parents' relationship. They will always carry the burden of that, no matter how wonderful, you might uncouple, right? They're always taking on, the emotional load of that parent's marriage.
So then, from that, and looking at the lens of, yes, we of course are responsible to and for our children. We're responsible to show up in our relationship. We are not responsible for our partner. But how then do we start from that place in challenging times, during struggles, during the very busy and the chaotic lives that we're leading, that perhaps we can't make huge, drastic changes to? How can we support one another from that lens to then move into parenting as a team when, like you said, we might not have been trained to be in a relationship, and we have not been trained to be parents, or we have very different experiences, how we were raised, and our parents and the couples or the relationships that they had, and our relationship with our parents, from the children's standpoint, now moving into parenthood. How do we take that through to support each other as parents?
That's probably a whole other, conversation in itself, sort of understanding back to, early experiences and how we meet our partners and the psychology of relationships, which is really fascinating. But one of the things I would, encourage couples to do is have check-ins.
Okay.
It will minimize the struggles. It'll help maintain your connection to each other. If you can't have a daily check-in, and sometimes daily check-ins are what you're already doing, like who's picking up, we ran out of milk, can you stop, who's cooking dinner, those types of things, the hockey, the, extracurriculars. But a bigger check-in, or, like a 20, 30-minute check-in, like think of Sunday evening when the children go to bed, right? Or they're sort of winding down, that you actually sit at the table and you say, okay, how are you doing? How am I doing? And how are we doing together? So there might be some logistical things like, who's paying the bill, who's taking kids where. And then there's how are you doing? So when we have an intentional check-in with our partner, and let's say, somebody left that morning and they forgot to do the kiss goodbye. You might not have liked how that person left. So in that check-in, we're coming together knowing that we're going to have those discussions. So it doesn't feel threatening. Right now, all of a sudden, we're having a disagreement, and and there's something called the kitchen sink, right? So someone forgot to put the dishes in the dishwasher. Now, all of a sudden, you always do this. You never do that. I'm always picking up the slack, right? But those intentional check-ins bring us together, where we can actually start to say, like, it's okay. There's a safety here that you and I can have this discussion. And I don't feel like you're going to reject me or abandon me, because we're actually talking about the things like, hey, this happened this morning, oh my God, I was in a rush. I was late for a meeting. I can do better. I know that's really important to you. right? So now we've created a bridge where we can freely move from one end, and so can the children, right? It's safe for them to also move through the family system that way. A great thing, I don't know if you've seen on social that, couples are actually renting Airbnbs at the beginning of the year, and they take like their laptops, they take their whiteboard, and they actually plan out, and set goals for, their relationship, for family life, and they kind of map it out, which I think is really great to have this, real intentional, goal setting, and working together to achieve, because we're now talking about shared values.
That's so beautiful. And I mean, you know what? We're in this month of love. We're still near the beginning of the year. I don't see why this can't still happen, right? We can't, we can still come together, even if it's one of those 2 hour blocks, a date night on a dime, or, we're at the dining room table and with some snacks or what have you, to go through this process, because it can be very simple, but that intentionality behind it, I think, is so important. Now, I'm so grateful that we've had this conversation. It's been so incredibly helpful for me, especially, but I know the listener as well is taking so much away from it. As we close, can you provide us with perhaps a way to have a reflection, and perhaps starting with yourself, or if you're feeling disconnected in your own relationship, what is that first step, or one small thing that someone can do right now to start rebuilding their bond, or to have that initial conversation with their partner, or to get things back on track, and reconnecting through that thread of love?
There's 101 different things people can do, but if you're struggling, you can do something so simple. Think of making lunches, right? How we make lunches for our children. Maybe the partner is making the lunches, whoever's responsibility. If it's not yours and you want to connect with your partner, imagine just taking a little sticky note and making a heart on it, or saying, thinking about you, and just sticking it in their lunch bag. Simple, and it makes you feel warm inside, right? There's a great book. It's called The Love Dare. And the Love Dare is a 30-day or 40-day challenge, right? And this is not easy. One of my clients brought it in and told me about it. So I thought, okay, I'm going to practice this in my own relationship. And so the Love Dare is a lesson. There's a quote. It explains, what they want you to do for that particular dare. And then you have to do the dare, and there's a reflection in the book afterwards. And so I was doing it you can do it by, with your partner, or you can do it without telling your partner that you're doing it. So you could see that person's reactions to the dare. And you have to be able to get through that dare before you move on to the next dare. And it was challenging, and when I was doing the reflection pieces, I figured out afterwards, that the love dare is more about me, and learning, things like patience, and being open to receiving, to give to my partner in a way that, I had never experienced before. So it opened up all these new feelings for myself. We can also, if we're working together in our partnership, we can have date experiences. So, how we talked about, date on a dime, you can actually, like, to connect, right? Sometimes we forget that the other person has interests that may not be my interests, and vice versa. So those date experience is taking the full year, and you pick 6 date experiences that you like. Your partner picks 6 date experiences, and you can't complain. You have to do the things on those dates, right? And those might be maybe bigger dates. Maybe they might, kind of be a little bit more expensive than just sort of those dates on a dime. But then you go and experience, right? So, if your partner loves that activity, then, and you've never done it before, you're going to go do that with your partner, right? And, you're going to share in their interests and vice versa. And nobody can complain about the other person's date pick. And the idea is to have fun with it, right? And you can also go on a date experience where you're both not an expert at whatever that date is.
Mhm.
So if you're going, on a date with your spouse who's an avid golfer and you've never golfed a day in your life, it's not going to be fun for that person, right? But if you've never golfed before and, you go and have that experience together, right? It can be a very intimate experience and fun where you're laughing at each other, you're flawed, right? So it can actually really be a great connection with each other.
These are some beautiful ideas. I think often it's just coming up with the idea and moving into action and like you're saying, placing that energy and that intention where it rightfully should be. So I'm so grateful that you spent some time with us here. I'm so happy that we had this conversation. Where can the listener find you? Should they wish to continue learning, or perhaps they want to see if they can be supported even further through your services?
Well, they can start by, going on my social media, Mary Marano, and I'm the do or die relationship doctor, where I do Mary Minutes and give you little snippets of information and relationship suggestions. If you go on our website, lifeandfamilycounseling.com, you can find us there with a whole bunch of, like a wealth of information. And I've also written Relationship SOS Ready, Set, Grow. So people can, purchase the workbook, and it's a great and easy way after working with hundreds of people. The book was created to explore languages of love, go back to early experiences, understand, the toxic, perhaps relationship patterns that might exist in our relationship and how to move past them. There's a great little vocabulary in there. So it's really like that, guide to self-development. So when we say relationship, it's the relationship with yourself first and then with others. Because if you don't master that one, it's going to be really hard to master relationship with others.
Thank you so much. I'll definitely include all of those links in the notes for this podcast episode. And I look forward to staying in touch. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Mary.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, how good was that conversation? I took notes. I'm sure you have a lot of takeaways. Really, the main things that really I'm taking away from my conversation with Dr. Mary Marano is that relationships require work, but more than that, they require intention. And those small, consistent actions can really make a big impact. Another thing that I am taking away is that partnership, that relationship with my partner is the foundation of the family's well-being, and really looking at that structure and moving from there. And that, of course, even in the busiest seasons, there are moments of connection, big or small, that will keep love strong. I love the analogy of the connection thread when we are pulled in all directions. And I'm definitely going to be taking those practical tips and those stories that Dr. Mary shared with us to prioritize connection, even when life gets hectic. I invite you to head to the notes for this podcast episode to find the links and all of the information that Dr. Mary has shared in this episode, so that you can begin this journey of prioritizing your relationship even during the busiest times in your life. If you like this episode, I encourage you to please rate it and write me a review in Apple Podcasts. And of course, share it with someone who you feel could gain from this episode as well. We've got many conversations, so much great value to share this year on The Juggle is Real. So make sure that you're subscribed. And I can't wait to see you next week for a brand new episode. Until then, take good care.